Greetings, Facebook Live. Ben Axelrod, Matt Florjancic coming to you live from WKYC studios. One day before the Cleveland Browns host the Buffalo Bills in what will be their preseason home opener. A lot of storylines heading into this game. If you've been watching Hard Knocks, you're obviously aware of that. Tyrod Taylor facing his former team. Corey Coleman facing his former team. A lot of links between these two franchises, and obviously it's only a preseason game, but you know, as you kind of build from game one to game three, game four is kind of a throwaway where you're making decisions.
Nobody likes game four.
Yeah, where you're making decisions on the back end of your roster. But as you make that build from, you know, your opener in game one to what they call the dress rehearsal in game three, we're here in the middle at game two. It sounds like we're going to get a longer look at Tyrod Taylor and maybe a little more about what this Browns team is going to look like come September 9th.
No question about it. They've come out and said the first teamers are going to play a little bit longer. Typically, they play one or two series in the first game, maybe play into the second quarter in the second game. I wouldn't be surprised to see the first team offense either continue a series into the second quarter or maybe play one series into the second quarter. Mm-hmm. I really want to see that offense continue to build on what they did, but I want to see them run the football effectively too. They were outstanding passing the ball. Jarvis Landry looked good. David Njoku looked good. Rashard Higgins looked good when he was in with the first and second team. Antonio Callaway, not so much with the first team, but much better with the second, so we want to see growth from him. Tyrod Taylor is going to lead the first team offense down the field. We think he can do that consistently well, but he's got to get some help from the running game. It starts with Carlos Hyde, but Nick Chubb is going to play a key factor in there as well. During that episode of Hard Knocks on Tuesday, he said he was working his tail off just to get back to the line of scrimmage, where Baker Mayfield was like, man, this is fun, isn't it? And Chubb was not having as much fun that night. It was a little bit more difficult for him. So I look for Hyde and Chubb to really try to make a statement in this game and make the most of the opportunities to get rushing the ball.
Yeah, I think and again, a year ago we learned there's only so much you can take away from a preseason, even, let alone the record, what you get in and out of each game. But I think if you were to look, all things considered, the opener against the Giants, there are a lot of positives to take away. The passing game, whether it was Tyrod Taylor or Baker Mayfield leading the offense, the wide receiver play much improved from a year ago. Obviously, some question marks still on that offensive line and who's going to play where and the defense. But if you're going to look at one glaring negative, it was that running game, regardless of who was in there at running back. That's going to be something that I think the Browns put a lot of emphasis on moving forward. That's something they're still trying to work out in this training camp. I do think, though, it was interesting listening to Hugh Jackson's comments yesterday. It sounds like there's some debate after Tyrod Taylor what this quarterback rotation is going to look like.
If you read into the tea leaves yesterday, it seemed like Drew Stanton was number two, but they wanted to get Baker Mayfield some playing time early in the preseason, and that's why he was on the field. Actually, Drew Stanton didn't touch the field at all against the Giants. I think that's because they're comfortable knowing what he is as an NFL quarterback. They wanted Tyrod to obviously run the first-team reps. They wanted to see what Baker could do, and then they gave Brogan Roback some time. But it sure seemed like yesterday that Drew Stanton could be the guy that gets the call if something were to happen to Tyrod Taylor.
I think, you don't have to apologize for saying Tyrod or Tyrod. There's enough out there that,
I'm working on it.
Tyrod's dad says it's Tyrod. So if the man who named him is saying it's Tyrod, I think we can go with either or.
I hope so.
Anyways, I think it is interesting how they're going to work out this quarterback rotation heading into the season. Obviously, I think if Tyrod Taylor were to go down, the very next week you would see Baker Mayfield out there on the field. Now, what would they want to do in terms of in the middle of the game? Are we in a situation where if Tyrod's the starter, Drew Stanton's the backup, and they only want to put Baker Mayfield in there if he's actually starting the game? I think there are a few ways they could go with this one. But Drew Stanton, technically he's their number 3 quarterback, but he's not necessarily an afterthought. This is a guy who's a legitimate backup in the NFL. You look at this team moving forward, assuming Tyrod isn't on this roster in 2019, Drew Stanton seems to be the favorite to, he's under a 2-year deal, and I would imagine that's because he'll be Baker Mayfield's backup in 2019. I am interested to see how they sort this thing out. And if we get closer to a dress rehearsal and they want Drew Stanton to be the backup quarterback heading into the season, it's going to be really interesting to see how they go about that moving forward.
No question about it. The quarterback situation is always number one on the minds of Browns fans, regardless of who is in that number one spot. There's always talk about the backup quarterback in this town, and it looks like from an in-game standpoint, if something happens to Taylor, it's Drew Stanton.
Right.
And then they get Baker ready on a full week's notice. I think that would be the ideal way to handle it, and I think that's how they want to handle it as of now until they see more of Baker and get a little bit more comfortable seeing him from a consistency standpoint. But, long term, Drew Stanton is the backup quarterback for this team.
Yeah.
He could be the backup to Tyrod Taylor. He could be the backup to Baker Mayfield, and I think he will be the backup to Baker Mayfield at least next year. Maybe if he wants to stay around after that, who knows? But he is the ultimate team guy at this point.
Yeah.
He's trying to do everything he can to get Baker Mayfield ready as Tyrod works with the number one team. And that cannot be understated. I don't think that voice existed in the locker room last year.
It really hasn't since Josh McCown.
You're right. It hasn't. And even he struggled to get through to a younger quarterback because he was more concerned about having to start and play in games that he was supposed to be out for.
And look at who he was dealing with.
And he was dealing with a little bit of a pain in the neck to deal with. But you look at this time around, I finally feel good about the status of the room because Tyrod is with Todd Haley. And then Ken Zampese is in the ear of Baker Mayfield, who also has Drew Stanton, who also has Hugh Jackson. And it's just a lot of things are set up for the long-term success of the quarterback room if they stick to the plan. Now, this is Cleveland, and we know plans will go awry very quickly. And if something were to change in that process, then we're talking about something completely different. But as it stands right now, Taylor and Haley, running the offense with Baker, learning from Drew Stanton and Ken Zampese and Hugh Jackson, all are positive things.
Yeah, and you watch Hard Knocks, Drew Stanton certainly comes off as an extension of the coaching staff. And you just look at the logistics of it. When they signed Drew Stanton to a 2-year deal, it was kind of a head-scratcher because if you already have Tyrod, if you already have Baker, I think he got signed before they drafted Baker, but everybody knew they were going to be drafting a quarterback at number one. So you knew the three quarterbacks you were going to be carrying on this roster, and to sign him one to a 2-year deal, but you just look at it, Tyrod Taylor's probably not going to be on this team heading into 2019. Baker, you would imagine at that point, will be elevated to a starter status, and then you have a backup for him in Drew Stanton, who he already knows and who he's comfortable with. It just makes a lot of sense. Having said that, the wide receiver is very much a question mark still, as long as Josh Gordon's future with this team and future for the season is uncertain. It's always going to be a question mark. They're looking to fill that hole, and they brought in Des Bryant today. We'll see how it works out, whether or not they'll sign him to a deal. But at the very least, Des Bryant is in Berea, and that's certainly an underlying storyline heading into this preseason encore.
He looks the part of what you need out of that position.
You look at the picture of him up there signing autographs in Hopkins.
Yeah, he looks the part. He has the pedigree. He has the productivity levels in his earlier days with the Cowboys. You want everything to go right, and if he's willing to work and to be, part of the team, not trying to distract from what the mission is, he's a guy you want. I mean, his stats are incredible. His physical attributes are off the chart. This guy is a true talented wide receiver, and they don't grow on trees like Des Bryant. I mean,
we've learned that.
Yeah. I mean, if anything has taught us over the last 4 years, wide receivers and good ones are hard to come by.
Yeah.
So this would be a great signing if they're able to get him in and get him to buy into what they're trying to do. They've got a lot of selling to do. This is a team that was 0-16, 1-31. Using wide receivers was not something that they were especially very good at. But with Jarvis Landry here, I think that is going to be the key to getting this thing right.
Yeah.
Is sitting him down with Jarvis Landry and having Jarvis kind of set the tone in the meeting, but also trying to gauge Bryant's interest and commitment level to this team.
Yeah.
Is it just for a paycheck? Is it for a bigger paycheck by signing a 1-year deal with this team to try and maybe get another contract after this season? gauge how he is, and if you believe that he can truly be a part of the solution rather than a problem, you bring him in here. And then if you do ever get Josh Gordon back, which is still an if, you have Josh Gordon, Jarvis Landry, Des Bryant, Antonio Callaway, and Rashard Higgins. Wow. Does that look a heck of a lot better than what happened at the wide receiver position last year, where it was Kenny Britt and basically anybody that they could throw out there?
Right. Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. I think as long as it's a one-year deal, which all indications are, I mean, there are reports that Des Bryant turned down a multi-year deal from the Baltimore Ravens earlier this offseason. If he's looking for that one-year prove-it deal, that really comes with no strings attached. You're going to pay him in guaranteed money, whatever you're going to pay him in guaranteed money. He'll get his game checks along the way, but you can cut him then and move on. I mean, we've seen, look, a year ago, they cut Kenny Britt in the first year of his contract. I go back to 2014.
That was a big contract that they had to eat, too.
Yeah, with multiple years still remaining.
4-year contract.
I go back to 2014. They cut Ben Tate right in the middle of the season in the first year of his deal. It's not something that's unprecedented, and if it's only a one-year deal, to me, it's a no-strings-attached situation. So if I'm the Browns, I'm doing my best sell job. Again, it's not my money to spend, so that's up to Jimmy and Dee Haslam, what they're willing to spend on a 29.7-year-old wide receiver who, by the way, caught 69 balls last year for, I think, 836 yards or so and 6 touchdowns. His production he had 3 straight Pro Bowl years where he had like 1,300 yards in each of those seasons. His production dipped in those 2 years, especially when Tony Romo was out of the lineup. He bounced back a little bit last year. I don't think he's necessarily damaged goods.
No, not at all. And you look at that 3-year stretch, he improved in his yardage 2 out of those 3 years, improved in touchdowns every year, started with 12, went to 13, then to a career-high 16. He had 92 catches, 88 catches, 80-plus catches. He is a physical specimen that is a productive wide receiver. And if you give him a semblance of consistency at quarterback, you get solid play out of him. Last year, the Cowboys were in a state of flux. They had a lot of issues going on preseason, during the season. Dak Prescott was still at the quarterback position, but they didn't have as potent of a running game.
Sure.
This year, the Browns are trying to build up their running game, but they have other wide receivers that could take pressure away and allow the field to open up for a guy like Des Bryant. You put Des Bryant and Josh Gordon with Jarvis Landry in the slot on the field at the same time.
Right.
Good luck trying to cover that, because that means Jarvis Landry has one-on-one coverage with a safety, and you have to like your odds of getting first downs that way. You also have to like the fact that Josh Gordon can separate with his speed, and Des Bryant with his size can go up and get a jump ball against a cornerback. In a perfect world, they get Josh back. They sign Des Bryant on a no-lose situation deal, and they get this wide receiver core built up to the likes that we have not seen in a very long time.
Sure, and then you still have Duke Johnson and David Njoku and a plethora of weapons around them.
I'm starting to get excited about this offense. I got to temper my excitement because, anything can happen. But just think about Tyrod Taylor has to just look at this and go, wow, I'm throwing to this guy and this guy and this guy.
Compared to what he had in Buffalo.
Compared to Buffalo and compared to what the Browns were when he got traded here in March. It's kind of like, holy cow. It's like the parting of the Red Seas, like completely different options for him as to what he even started with back in April. I mean, where he had Jarvis Landry and Josh Gordon so here and not. But my goodness, if everything plays out in a good breaks well for the Cleveland Browns, and we all know how often that doesn't happen, but say that they finally get this situation right and they get Des Bryant in here, wow. I mean, you talk about a loaded weapon offense with weapons for Tyrod Taylor to run down the field with. That's it.
Yeah. Kelly here says, Des looks good on paper, just not convinced. That's understandable.
Hey,
I mean, it's a risk. A lot of question marks, and it's another question mark you're throwing into a wide receiver room full of question marks already with Josh Gordon and Antonio Callaway.
No question about that.
John here says, sign Des and let's dominate the AFC North. Hey, who knows? You throw together that offensive unit and Tyrod Taylor plays at a Pro Bowl level, who knows?
Hey, the Steelers can do it with one receiver and a running back. Why not throw as many weapons out on the field as we can and see what we can do?
Yeah, I don't think this franchise is in any position to say no to talent.
They cannot
I think that's
turn
what it
down
comes down
talent.
to, right?
You don't walk away from talented NFL players. I mean, you look at what they had at wide receiver.
What do you do if you're Sashi Brown?
he's gone. We don't have to deal with that nightmare anymore. Just calming my nerves down, right? As soon as I hear that name, I just get a shiver up my spine. But here's the thing. Okay, you look at where we were 2 years ago after 2016. Corey Coleman was the number one option. They were trying to get some combination of Jordan Payton, Rashard Higgins, and Seth DeValve was converting from wide receiver to tight end, and there's a Ricardo Lewis, I think, was in there as well. They were trying to get all these guys to figure out who could be a number 1, a number 2, and a number 3 potential target for the quarterback. One of those guys is still on the roster at this point. One's on injured reserve with Ricardo Lewis having neck surgery, but only one of those 4 guys that were true wide receivers are still even on the roster, and it was 2 years ago. You look at what we have now at wide receiver, and the options are so much more impressive and endless that you just can't help feeling positive. And if they add Des Bryant on a 1-year deal, that's all good news for this team. I don't see the downside, because if you sign him, give him a little bit of guaranteed money, and he turns out to be a cancer 3 weeks into the season, you cut bait with him and you move on.
I'm seeing this tweet now from Cleveland Browns senior media broadcaster and co-star of Ms. and Mrs. Nathan Zagura. He says, well, that's one of the perks of being in the building. Des Bryant just crashed Cleveland Browns Daily and said, what's up, Cleveland? Went on to say he likes the city, thinks he would look good in orange, and we are just trying to work some things out. So,
I'm starting
Des
to be
Bryant
optimistic.
is in the house.
I'm starting to be optimistic now.
Let's close this thing out. We've talked about the quarterbacks. We've talked about the wide receivers and Des Bryant's impending visit with the Browns and what's to come from that. What else do you have your eye on? One more thing that you have your eye on heading into this preseason second game.
I want to see what Denzel Ward does in that secondary. You know, all the talk is about this great pass rush that they have from Agba and Garrett and the stacked linebackers that they have. I want to see Denzel Ward take that next step. First drive out there, he commits a penalty. Does he learn from that? You know, how does he handle just every situation? Because earlier in the week we talked to some of the assistant coaches, and one of them was the cornerbacks coach, and he said we're working on getting him to understand situational football. Right. He's a raw talent. He's a fantastic talent, but he has to understand the game a little bit more. And I want to see how much progress Denzel Ward makes from game 1 to game 2. He had a rough week of practice. He was dealing with a sore ankle, and he did not look good guarding against Rashard Higgins. Yeah. I want to see him play healthy, and I want to see what he can do when he's fully in tune to the game plan.
Yeah, I think that's certainly we've spent so much time talking about Baker Mayfield. There's another top 4 pick on this team in Denzel Ward.
This is a guy who, you talk about Baker Mayfield all you want, but Denzel Ward is going to start.
Oh, yeah.
He absolutely has to start, because if Baker's not going to start, you look at, okay, they still had number 4, which is Ward. They had number 33, which was Corbett, and he has to be an impactful player. And right now he's at the left guard starting spot. And then you look at Chubb, was just 2 picks later. He figures to have a big role. Those number 4, number 33, and number 35 picks have to be instant contributors for this Browns team if Baker Mayfield is going to sit. You went 0-16 last year, and you had 4 of the top 35 picks. They have to play. Yeah. You weren't that talented last year, obviously, by the record, so they have to play. They have to show up, and they have to do their job. And Corbett, I'm pretty sure, is going to be a day 1 starter, because I think Bitonio is going to hold down that left tackle spot. I don't see Greg Robinson beating him out for the spot. I just don't. I think Bitonio will be entrenched at left tackle for at least the foreseeable future. Corbett will start at left guard. Chubb will be in the mix at running back. He might spell Carlos Hyde from here and there. They might ride the hot hand. But Denzel Ward absolutely has to play at the level of a number 4 overall pick who was a consensus All-American in college.
That's when you get these picks, you have to hit on him. And they seemingly hit on Myles Garrett a year ago. We'll see what happens with Jabril Peppers and David Njoku. But they like what they've seen from Baker Mayfield, and now it's time for Denzel Ward. So Matt will be out at First Energy Stadium tomorrow night, providing you all the latest from the game. That's going to do it for us today. For Matt Florjancic, I'm Ben Axelrod. Thanks for watching on Facebook Live.